My full name is Fatima Lilian Mustalier. To make it easier, the friends call me Lillian. I'm very happy that you came to join me again on another visit with James Clarkston. We did a show a while back, and we wanted to do a little touch-up here to remind the friends what we talked about, and then you're going to surprise us with a wonderful slideshow.
That's my intent, Lillian. There's just so much on the subject of ufology, especially what's going on right now. You just can't get it all into one program. I'm not even sure we could do it in two.
Probably not. They've been working on it for so many years. So, you know, you and I can't do it in one day. I agree with you. So,
hopefully we'll stimulate some people and they'll go out and study for themselves.
You want to just recap, like in just maybe 1 minute, what we talked about last week? We talked about your friend June.
Yes, my friend June. I'm a state section director for the Mutual UFO Network, and on the anniversary of the Roswell crash, July 4th, 1997, that was the 50-year anniversary, she called me and told me that she now wanted to go public with her story. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that she worked at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio between 1943 and 1951 as what would now be called an office manager. She had a Q-level security clearance, and while she was there, she was party to some very extraordinary events, and amongst the people where she worked, it was common knowledge that there has already been repeated contact with extraterrestrials, and that there were not one, but 3 crash retrieval cases that she knew about.
Mm-hmm. So in essence, she gave you documents to back this up, and if we do your slideshow, and hopefully we have enough time where we could maybe talk about some of the things that she shared with you.
That would be wonderful.
Could we do that? Yeah. Be kind of sneaky, actually, to put
it would work really well.
Put it on the end, so maybe we should do that. Would you like to set us up for your show here?
Yes, I would. I'd just like to remind everybody, hopefully they saw the first part of this. If they didn't, what we're trying to do here is to show that the universe is a vast and strange and complex thing, and there's a lot more going on out there than we ever imagine. So what we're going to do here is we're going to start off with kind of a quick grand tour of the universe, and we start off with our own home. We go to our nearest neighbor, the moon, and of course the source of all of our life and energy, our star, Sol, which it turns out that more than half of the main sequence stars in the galaxy are much like our own. And then we're just going to wander around our solar system.
Oh, look at that.
Exactly. Total eclipse from July 1991. This was the same eclipse where people in Mexico City routinely saw UFOs. I've seen the videotapes. This is broad daylight sightings, military parades. Some of the jets that flew over hundreds of thousands of people were diverted to chase after the UFOs. This is Venus. This is Venus as with its cloud covering. We move closest to the sun. Mercury viewed from the Mariner 10. And we're just going to keep touring around the solar system. This is a view of an asteroid, Gaspra. As our equipment has gotten better and better, we're able to see further and further into space. The mystery giant planet Jupiter with just a few of its moons. And the most exciting discovery, of course, is Europa, which they now believe could possibly have volcanic energy source and an ice shell on the outside, allowing some form of life to exist. Trying to get the scale is always difficult. The great red spot on the surface of Jupiter would hold 50 Earths. This shows you that things are not dead out there. You can just see a volcanic eruption on Jupiter's moon Io over the edge of the horizon. This is the most beautiful planet in many ways, the ring planet Saturn, with 6 of its moons. One of Saturn's moons, Enceladus. The more we learn that there's more to learn. There's just no end to the mystery.
I'd like to say something, you know, when we talk about UFOs, a lot of times people don't realize what all is involved here. We talk about planets, we talk about musical sounds, we talk about
A complex event.
yes, and it's not just some unidentified flying object. So
It's not just seeing a disk in the distance. We throw around numbers a lot. This is our home collection of planets minus Pluto, which is too small and too far out to see. And we talk about billions of things. We talk about billions of dollars, billions of miles, billions of light years even. And I want to just explain, we talk about how much is a billion. Let's say there's a billion stars in this particular slide. If we count 1 star per second and we never quit and we don't ever take a break, we will count 1,000 stars in 16.6 minutes. We will count 1,000,000 stars in 11.57 days. And if we never ever quit, we will get to our first billion in 31.7 years. And out in space, there are 100 billion galaxies visible. There are approximately 100 billion stars per galaxy, like our own. This pinwheel shape is repeated over and over again through the universe. It's an essential shape. Kind of odd that it looks like a UFO. It also looks like a Mandela. It also looks like many other of our most important symbols. There's strong evidence that more than half of the main sequence stars have planets. This is the Pleiades, which is a particular constellation where some people believe some of our extraterrestrial visitors originate. If only 1 out of every 1,000,000 planets has a position and evolutionary conditions like Earth, there are 10 billion planets out there that may be similar to Earth. The Hubble telescope has brought us some of the most extraordinary views. This is why it's great to be alive now. Anyone who can get on the internet can see the deepest views of space. These, interestingly enough, are called starbirth clouds. So everything that exists is being born and being dying in an endless cycle. We see all of these grandiose cosmic explosions, galaxies without end, worlds without number. And so we're supposed to assume just because someone tells us that we're all alone and that all of this glory was created just for a species called man. I find that very hard to accept. This is called a dying star. These are just magnificent images when you think that these are millions of light years across. In this particular photograph, we see stars being born and dying. The creation of black holes. Many people believe that black holes may be doorways into other universes, higher dimensions, or there may be wormholes that may rapidly connect us to other parts of the galaxy, which seem extraordinarily far by our limited technology. But to a civilization that may have existed for 10 million years, a civilization that may have survived overpopulation, environmental degradation, and its own battle with its weapons technology, to a civilization that survived all of those things and has gone outwards to conquer the stars, these distances may not mean anything at all.
I believe if a person gets into my webpage, which is usually at the end of the show, I believe some of these pictures can be accessed through these are the ones from the Hubble, no?
Yes, and you can type the Hubble onto a search engine, almost any search engine, and you can get extraordinary information, and all of these can be downloaded. These color slides are readily available in many places. There's never been a better time to tour the galaxy.
Yeah, excuse me.
I'm sorry.
Or you can go to my webpage and just push what's new on Mars, and I believe it'll jump you right in it.
That would be perfect.
Yeah, so.
This is the most extraordinary slide that I would like to certainly direct everyone's attention to. This is where you take the Hubble telescope, point it into the deepest view of space, and just like a camera lens, you set it on infinity. And every one of those blobs of light is not a star. Those are all galaxies.
Oh my.
Exactly. It staggers the imagination. And they have now proven that there are other planets in other star systems. Not that, I think for anyone who's taken a look at all of this, you already pretty much know that there are other star systems with other planets, and we are not alone. I don't think that's really up for grabs. The question is, have we been contacted? The question is, how long has this been going on? Some people believe it may have gone back way far into our history. But let's get down to a little nuts and bolts ufology. One of the things that we have to be able to do as a UFO researcher is not only to understand what is a UFO, as in something that has a high level of strangeness with a highly credible witness, we also have to be able to know what is not a UFO. And some well-meaning people will report routine astronomical objects as UFOs because they've never really looked at the sky. This is the planet Venus next to the moon. These are airliner headlights seen from a distance. This, of course, is a big annoyance. This is a hoax. This is a UFO you can make in your backyard. That's a flying peanut butter jar lid. This is an extraordinary photograph. A woman took this in broad daylight of a meteorite coming down. I would just like to point out this is the difficulty of UFO photographs. Having a camera, being in the right place at the right time, and knowing what to shoot. This is a newspaper article. The Air Force lied in 50s UFO explanation to keep spy planes, a secret study says, now made public. Military deceived the public about UFOs. This whole thing is hysterical because from a perspective of a criminal investigator, I've been around a lot of courtrooms and have testified many times, and one of the things that a defendant should never ever do is to tell the prosecutor or the police, well, I told a lie, but I don't do that anymore. Because the obvious question falls out of it, when did you stop lying? The other problem with this is the spy planes that they're now identifying as the UFOs that people saw in the 50s or 60s, they can't hover, they can't do right angle turns, and what is a spy plane after all? It's a plane that's designed to fly so high and so fast that no one can see it or know that it's there. So are they now admitting that their spy planes didn't do a very good job and all the UFOs that all the people saw were actually their spy planes? Now, of course, this is a stealth bomber, and it does have a rather extraordinary shape if you look at it from an end view, and it's possible that if you saw one of these, you might mistake it for a UFO. In fact, here's one of those mysterious UFOs from Mexico City. So you can see how there might be a similarity, except that this UFO can hover for long periods of time. It makes absolutely no noise, and when it wants to, it can accelerate out of view so fast that it looks like it was never there to begin with.
I've seen him do flips. I've seen him dematerialize and play with you. It's incredible, and
I
I've
think
seen
it's
it
because
myself.
they're hyperdimensional.
Yeah.
Now, here is the one aircraft that can take off and land vertically. This is a Harrier jump jet. Now, the problem with this is if you were anywhere near a Harrier jump jet when it was landing or taking off, you would know it because it would deafen you. It has a tremendous ground effect, and those jets scream. This is a diagram. It's hard to see, but this is a aircraft called a hypersonic pulse jet, otherwise known as the Aurora. This just shows you how UFOs are in the news. There's a friend of mine, Peter Davenport.
Oh yeah, I recognize him. He's a friend of mine too.
Yes, he is.
Imagine that. Yeah.
He's a great boon to the UFO community. He runs the National UFO Reporting Center in Seattle and does it on a shoestring budget. He's one of the most dedicated people that I know. This shows you how our friends are out there everywhere. In fact, I just saw a very cute Volkswagen commercial about UFOs. technology so advanced it will help answer some big questions. This is a photo that shows where it all began back in Roswell. This is where the big cover-up started. At first they published a newspaper story and said that they had captured a disc, and then they changed their story within 24 hours once word got back to Washington, and they put together a press release of these two gentlemen holding up a bunch of old torn up weather balloons and whatnot. This is not the material that the witnesses reported seeing, and this is not the material, a piece of which my friend June got to hold. This was the government records, the GAO, Government Accounting Office, results of a search for records concerning the 1947 crash in Roswell, Mexico. This is an important book, Blank Check, talks all about black budget spending. A man named J. Allen Hynek invented the encounter system. This is for anybody who wants to learn a little basic ufology. There are nocturnal lights, daylight discs, radar visual sightings. A close encounter of the first kind is an observation of a UFO at 500 feet or less. Close encounter of the second kind is the same type of encounter as the first one, only there is some kind of physical trace. This can be ground depressions, branches broke, residual radiation, electromagnetic interference, changes in soil composition, unusual changes in soil chemistry resulting in bacteriological infestation, any number of things.
The kind I run into.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the way that you and I met when we talked about the koi fish, that I took that to be a close encounter of the second kind.
It makes your hair fall out. I would like to mention that.
That's true. I remember you showed me that too.
Yeah.
And then, of course, close encounter of the third kind, which is where they got the title for the famous movie. Yeah. And that's where you not only get to see the UFO, but you get to see the driver. And then there's a new one, which, of course, Mr. Hynek didn't quite get around to, but we all use as common terminology, is close encounter of the fourth kind. And these are abduction events. And that's where you get all of the above, plus you get to go with the driver, even though you don't want to. I want to mention a comrade of mine. This is an important sighting. A man named Deputy Dale Spower. He was kind of a martyr to the cause. April 17th, 1966, 5:05 a.m. on Route 224 out of Portage County, Ohio, Deputy Dale Spower saw a craft that was like a glowing football cut in half, as big as a house, and he was involved in one of the most extraordinary high-speed pursuits of all time. That's Deputy Dale Spower.
Oh, yeah, there he is.
Right in the middle. And the reason that he's important is that he would not back down and wouldn't change his story. And he stood up to a man from Project Blue Book, a Major Quintanilla, and he just kind of, without even bothering to investigate what all these police officers had seen and what numerous civilians had seen, and all of the excellent circumstances, including the fact that the man on the left in this picture took a picture of a UFO within 24 hours of the deputy's sighting that looks almost exactly like what he described. Despite all of the evidence to the contrary, he said that perhaps the deputy was having a nervous breakdown. And the public wasn't as tolerant back then as they are now.
Yes, things are really changing, and we're
Exactly.
really kind of glad about that.
And Deputy Spower was forced out of his job. He had a nervous breakdown. His wife left him, and the last that anybody heard of him, he was doing odd jobs. And I have been trying to find out whatever happened to Deputy Dale Spower. That's another thing. If anyone who watches this show knows what happened to this poor man, I would like to write the definitive final tribute to him. This is a famous sighting case from McMinnville, Oregon. And one of the interesting things here is that several years later, the same craft was seen near Rouen, France, and another photograph was taken of almost the same thing. This is not the greatest print, but the UFO appears in the upper part of the photograph. Even Project Blue Book, which was highly skeptical, said this was one of the UFOs they were unable to dismiss. This just shows you how you analyze a UFO photograph. You may take solarized pictures, assign color values, look for strings, paste ups, and of course with computer technology, admittedly, the possibilities of fakes are even greater. This is a UFO shot from a South American research vessel with a close-up insert. January 16, 1958. Near the island of Trinidad. This is a UFO from Brazil.
Oh my.
Exactly. One of the important things to consider is that people do not just see classic saucers.
Exactly. Yeah,
They see many types of craft.
I have pictures of cigar-shaped crafts that we took in Utah. Yeah.
The triangles are a very mysterious and important part of the UFO scene in this day and age. People are also reporting acorn-shaped craft.
Yeah, the cigar-shaped one, you see it there?
Exactly.
Yeah, and we got that in the daytime, by the way, accidentally. Yeah.
This is an artist's representation of an event that occurred in the Midwest. The glowing fireball cases, which conceivably could be some sort of natural phenomena, they may range in size from 6 inches to 300 feet across. An artist's representation of an important sighting case from Wodonga, Australia. A cigar-shaped craft from Woodinville, Washington. A photograph of a UFO taken by a narcotics officer, Carlos Diaz, in Mexico. A dome disc craft from New Mexico. A UFO photo in Japan. These are blow-ups of much larger photos showing you the most important part of the picture. This is a UFO that showed up in a photograph taken in the 60s near Vancouver Island. This is still another UFO from Mexico. I want to mention here a friend of mine, an FBI agent, and he told me about his brother who was a United Airlines pilot who had an encounter almost exactly like this while he was on a domestic flight over the United States under ideal weather conditions. And the brother calls his FBI agent brother and tells him this whole story. And he talks about the fact that when they landed, of course the passengers, they went in 200 different directions. The pilot and the flight crew were called into an office. There was someone from the management and someone from a government agency who flashed his credentials very briefly. And when the pilot left the office, he wasn't quite sure what the guy had said about where they worked. And the man from the airline administration said very simply, "You want your job, you want your pension." It didn't happen.
I know of a case where one of these crafts flew really close by the supersonic plane.
The SST, right.
Yes, and somebody has that film, and people
That's
wasn't
an extraordinary film
It happened
clip.
so fast. Yeah, I'm not really sure who owns the rights to that, but I have seen that. And also the Concorde had several things flying next to him, and that was captured on film.
This is a very important UFO type because these things are being seen on almost a daily basis somewhere in the world. They're exceedingly mysterious. They're called black triangles. They can be anywhere up to 3 football fields across. Characteristically, they have lights at each corner. They are very, very quiet, possibly with an electrical hum. They have been seen just about everywhere, and they move in silently and slowly, and they don't seem really particular about being evasive until they decide that it's time to leave. And they go from hovering slowly or moving very slowly to, there was one that I read about the other night. This was information from a NASA contractor who talked about an intrusion into the radar grid around the Earth that happened recently by a black triangle that was also witnessed by people on the ground, When the triangle left, it took off at Mach 30, 30 times the speed of sound. This is an actual photo of one of the triangles.
The sighting at the Wainuchi that I was present at, one of the things, it never made a sound. It never made a sound. You just couldn't hear it. You could see it, and it never made any sound.
This just shows you our magazine for our organization, the MUFON UFO Journal. Every month they have important information on UFO cases. Now this is a little hard to make out, but this is an actual drawing that was done by some people who live outside of Shelton, Washington. In December of 1988, their entire family saw a formation of 3 triangles, boomerang shapes, they thought, go over their house. They had a sense that they were underneath something very massive and very solid, and it made an enormous electrical hum. There was no ground effect, and when the lead object went over their house, it was shining a searchlight of some sort down onto the ground.
And it makes it really interesting when we talk about local people, people and places that we can relate to, you know, living in this area. And
well, we have an important UFO heritage right here in the Northwest. And everybody in this family drew me pictures.
Mm-hmm.
This is the wife's picture of the same diagram, the same craft.
Excuse me, and for the friends in Anchorage, Shelton, Washington is how far east would you say of?
It's probably,
Olympia?
It's north and west of Olympia, I believe.
Yeah, I am backwards again. I was going east as usual. I'm just.
I'd say I believe about 30 miles, 30 some miles, approximately.
That's where Shelton, Washington is located.
My own area down in Grays Harbor County, November 25th, 1979, I investigated a crash retrieval case. And this is the actual headline from the Aberdeen Daily World, UFO wreckage in Elk River from November 25th, 1979. It stopped traffic in both directions on the Elk River Bridge. One man went hysterical and drove to the local police station in Westport. This is the second newspaper story, Air Force interested in UFO. And there was a final newspaper story, search called off for UFO. I went back and interviewed all of these people who saw this object coming down, and that was just part 1 of the story. The second part were all of the witnesses, many of whom were in law enforcement, who actually saw the military come down and seal off the logging roads. One man, who is now a logging executive, almost got into a fist fight with 2 soldiers who kept him from going to work that day. He didn't know anything about UFOs, couldn't care less about something crashing, but he just wanted to go to work. And the soldier said, "Oh no, we're doing maneuvers here." What's interesting, how often does the Army come down and do maneuvers on private property?
I've met some of those people under other circumstances, and that came up.
This is an artist's reproduction from a famous case in Pirassununga, Sao Paulo, Brazil. And a man named Tiago Machado reported being injured by a beam of light. There were also associated mysterious power failures. These are pictures of the actual ground impression marks that were located by government officials who went out to investigate this very mysterious case. This is a cover of a very important book. I have that book with me also. It's called An Alien Harvest by Linda Moulton Howe. And I would stress the importance to anyone who wants to get seriously into this subject. Her work is extremely valuable. She has a master's degree in communications from Stanford University. She's a brilliant speaker. Her books speak with authority and clarity, and they really drive home the high strangeness of this whole phenomena. Unfortunately, she talks about the dark side of ufology, which is cattle mutilation. This is her other book, Glimpses of Other Realities, Volume 1. The second volume is now out. This is a classically mutilated cow. Characteristically, the eye sockets are carved out in a perfectly circular manner. Tissue is excised from the jaw. There's virtually no blood at the scene. There's evidence of anal coring. And the oddest thing about all of these incidents is that in many years, over 30 years now, of documented cattle mutilation investigation, no one has ever been arrested. Even though everyone says, oh, it's done by cults, but no one can find the cults. No one finds, in many of these cases, any evidence that anybody has walked near the mutilated cow until it's recovered. This is an actual photograph taken by a deputy sheriff showing 3 marks in the ground that appear to be tripod impressions. This is a photograph showing the edges of tissue. The important thing about this tissue is that it was not cut with a steel instrument. It was cut with some sort of a high heat device. You have to excuse me, I'm trying to recover from a cold.
Yeah, it's been a few harsh days here.
These are micro photographs of tissue samples showing that the hemoglobin right near the edges of the cuts has been boiled. That is what is shown on the bottom. On the top of the slide is regular hemoglobin in the tissue. This is a picture of a report from the School of Veterinary Medicine in the University of Oregon. And down at the very bottom there, I know that it's hard to see, but it indicates that the tissue cuts are most consistent with a heat-induced injury. So obviously we're left to conclude that all of these cults who go out and mutilate the cows, they obviously drive around with portable lasers in the back of their pickup trucks that, by the way, don't leave any tire marks.
Sure they do, you know that.
Well, I knew it all along. This is a photograph of mysterious circles seen in the landscape near where some mutilated cattle were discovered. One of the things that occurs in this situation is that it's extremely frustrating and aggravating to the ranchers. We're going to change gears and get into a field that you're more familiar with.
Yes, very much so. Crop circles.
Exactly.
Crop circles, I got a chance to accidentally go visit some of them a couple of years ago while I was traveling, talking to the people in Isles, the coordinator for Washington, for the U.S. She was in England, and so she emailed me, and I went back and I got to go to, it was in excess of 110 circles in
I know that they're seasonal.
Illinois. Yeah.
Every year they appear in England and many other places.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have some locally in, locally we have some in Chehalis. And here again, I had an experience and my hair fell out again. So I'm just not going to have any hair here sooner or later.
I'm going to follow you around, and whenever your hair falls out, I'll know something important is occurring. This is just showing the inside of the classic crop circle. These patterns have evolved over time. And for those who believe that this is some sort of natural phenomena, I would defy you to come up with a natural phenomena that can produce perfect rings and geometric shapes. This is another important book called Harbingers of World Change by Alec Bartholomew. It has some of the most beautiful crop circles, at least my personal favorites. This is the Mandelbrot Formation, which was found near Cambridge, I believe in '93. And it is so perfect that it's hard to put words on it. It's so precise and so extraordinarily well formed.
That's one that I liked so well, I painted it on my RV, this particular one here.
It's the symbol of the intersection between chaos and order. This particular diagram is produced when you run all of the numbers through a computer in chaos theory. One of the most important UFO books of all time is The Interrupted Journey by John G. Fuller, because it talks about Betty and Barney Hill and Dr. Benjamin Simon, who interviewed them separately. And Betty and Barney Hill were taking a trip together, and they had an abduction experience on September 19th of 1961. Now, they didn't even know that any of this had happened until they sought out medical help because of the ongoing series of symptoms that they suffered. And Barney died in his late 40s from high blood pressure, heart attacks, etc. Many people believe that it was also because he couldn't cope with the stress of the event. Now, Betty Hill, on the other hand, she went on to become a famous UFO researcher, and to this day, I think she's still involved.
I believe so, yeah.
Their story was not published until 5 years after it happened. This is just a map showing the route that they traveled that night. They originally saw a bright star that eventually became a huge oblong craft with a double row of windows. They were confronted by beings who took them on board the craft for the classic medical examinations. Betty was able to draw from memory a star map in 3 dimensions that she saw on board the spacecraft. She was shown this map by the leader. It turns out that approximately 2 or 3 years after this drawing went public, they discovered the actual formation of stars that the map seems to pretty well match up to. She said that the leader of the expedition told her that the darkened lines were trade routes. The cover of the book, Fire in the Sky, the Travis Walton Experience. November 5th, 1975, I'm sure many people have seen the movie. I just want to add, for those who think that the movie tells the whole story, I would say that a lot of the movie is true, providing that you leave out the whole middle portion of what supposedly happened to Travis while he was on board the spacecraft. What's interesting to note, 2 days later, November 7th, 1975, at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, there was an alarm at the K-7 missile silo. Sabotage alert teams responded, and then they refused to enter the missile silo area because there was a large orange UFO hovering over the compound. And you would say, well, how do we know that? And the reason we know that, that's from the command director's log at NORAD. Once again, documents obtained through the Freedom of Information Act.
Peter Davenport makes reference to NORAD a lot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is the book Intruders, The Incredible Visitations at Copley Woods. Bud Hopkins, I highly recommend this book. This is another really important text. They made an excellent TV, I believe it's a 2-part miniseries on that with Richard Crenna starring in it, which I think you can now rent. One of the things in that book are the drawings of the Greys, and the Greys, like our friend here on the table, it's really odd that people, no matter where they get abducted, keep reporting the same kind of being over and over again, which really makes me wonder, since I don't know 2 people who have the same dreams.
Now, he's on my webpage.
Well, he ought to be.
Yeah.
And at that point, that's the conclusion of my slideshow presentation. And I hope that that kind of challenges everybody to have a different view of the universe and a different view of the UFO phenomena.
Well, challenge is the right word. You know, it's very interesting, and it just goes from this extreme to that extreme. There's many things in between. Personally, I think there's a difference between abductions and contacts, and that's another subject we might want to cover at one time. Well, let's see. I'm trying to see if there's anything local that we maybe left out. There was
I did investigate a case of 2 fishermen
horse.
on
Did
Mount
you do
Rainier.
the horse?
Oh, yes,
yeah,
we did. That was the same summer,
yeah,
too.
Yeah, let's do the fishermen, and then we do the horse.
This was in 1988 again, and I was sent to contact 2 fishermen who live in Hoquiam, Washington. And the story that they had to tell was extraordinary. I interviewed them independently, and they were on a fishing trip together. They were near a campground, and they were in a small pickup truck. So one of them's driving, one of them's a passenger. The first thing that they see is that they think that they're going to watch an airliner do an emergency landing on the highway because they see this incredibly intense spotlight coming down over the roadway. And then they realize that that's not what's going on, because when the object gets above them, it's another one of these mysterious triangular craft, and it stops over them. So this makes them scared, and they decide that they better keep going on down the highway. And the weird part is, this triangular craft, when they start moving down the road, it backs through the air. And the faster they go, the faster it goes. And finally, in a total panic, they pulled off into a camping area, and the craft changed directions instantly and took off at an unbelievable rate of speed over the hills, and that was the last they saw of it.
I've seen them do that. They get right over you, and just as you think you know what it is, they flip back on you and they change directions, and it's pretty awesome.
And I keep wondering, of course, we all want to know, why are they here? What are they doing? Is this surveillance? Is it archaeology? Is it reconnaissance for an invasion? Is it because they're trying to gradually acclimate us to their presence? We've talked about that before.
Well, I believe that it's just all part of a new awareness and how the world really is. And if you go back into history, they've really always been part of us. It's just now all of a sudden we get more interested in with all the theories. And, we blame the government for a lot of things, but myself being from a different country, I do know that the government sort of works with what they inherited, because it isn't really their
That's
stuff.
a very important point.
It's not really their stuff that they got, so they just have to take what was handed to them over these 4- and 8-year terms here. And all in all, I think they're getting a little friendlier, what you say?
I think so. I think also, I have to say, in all fairness to the government agencies, it turns out in these new Majestic 12 documents that are being released that among the original crash retrieval cases, they picked up 3 bodies. And the technicians, I believe there were 4 technicians who helped with this body recovery, and they died from unexplained causes within 48 hours of the time that they handled these bodies. And they described it as bleeding out. In other words, almost like an Ebola virus infection. And we have to put this in a historical context. This is 1947. World War II is over. We know that we're entering into the Cold War phase with the Russians. Nobody's quite sure who's going to be top dog in the world. We recover a spacecraft, we recover bodies, and now we find out that there's a possibility that they may be carrying a disease which presumably we couldn't lick.
Well, yeah, but...
What would you do if you were the government official?
I'd be quiet.
Exactly.
I just would be quiet.
That's exactly it, Lillian. And maybe in all fairness, they tried to do what they thought was right.
Yeah.
And the policy of secrecy, the military tends to do the same thing over and over again, and politicians tend to take the safest course of action. And maybe not telling us the truth and keeping us in the dark was the safest course of action. But now we're beginning to get the feeling, in fact, the new Majestic 12 documents pretty much prove this, that there are elements within the government who want the truth to come out, and they are deliberately leaking important information to UFO researchers. And maybe this is all part of their way of getting us ready.
Yeah, like we mentioned in the last segment, that with the commercials and the X-Files and things like that, it's just becoming a bigger part of our reality. So in a way, it is less threatening, and I believe that's really good. Because when we look in the tabloids and everywhere, everything is doomsday. We so negative as a whole right now, and so I think shows like this, and people like us, is somewhat important to make the people aware, and then what do we do next, and how can we put it in a 3-dimensional context here.
I can't think of anything that would be more important to me And I think by extension, to anybody who's a searcher, anybody with a curious mind who wants to get at the truth, there couldn't be anything more important than trying to know who we really are in the universe. You know, this would give us possible insights into some of the deepest questions. You know, why are we here? What's life? What's God? I mean, what is the big meaning? And the only way we could really even get a grip on that would be to possibly contact other types of beings and try to see how they've grappled with those questions. And perhaps some people have speculated that we may be even in some senses an experiment, or in some senses we may have been genetically programmed to survive and flourish on the earth. So there's a possibility in that age-old argument between the creationists and the evolutionists, maybe they're both right.
Maybe they are both right, and the thing is, if we can just coexist, everything will probably be okay. Would you agree?
Absolutely, because perhaps when we meet these beings and they look at us, they're going to look at us just as people of the earth. They won't see us as different races or different nations or anything else. And some people have speculated that's why they're also reluctant to tell us the truth, because they've realized that a lot of us are going to look at things a lot differently once we realize that we are the people of the planet Earth. There actually isn't such a thing as the United States or Russia or any other country.
Right.
Those are political conveniences that we've created to get the job done. But in all reality, this is one world and one people.
Yeah, so we all related by universal consciousness.
Absolutely.
In a way, yeah, we are. Let's see. Maybe we would have another minute, and I would like for you to show us the front of David Chase's book again.
I do. I think that would be a good thing to do.
That seems to be one of my favorites. He's like a forensic artist type person that
I've watched him do these drawings.
That creates drawings from people's memories as they presented. In my own book, I make reference to David Chase quite often.
He's done these extraordinary drawings. I've watched him just sit for long periods of time and do these incredibly intricate diagrams. He has an extraordinary talent, and he's also quite knowledgeable on the subject of UFOs as a whole.
So let me ask you this. Would you happen to know Fred Epps? He's a gentleman that owns a bookstore in Seattle. And out of all the people I've ever met, he has the most knowledge of alien beings. And it turns out he reads all this in books, and then he puts it together so nicely, and it just makes you feel like he has like he's their next door neighbor. He gives you their history, who they are, where they come from, and he just has such knowledge that he read about. So.
I guess that sort of leads into an important point. If I can't bring you a UFO in here. I wish that I could. I can't bring an alien being up here to be interviewed. But if I had to go into a court of law and prove that this is a real phenomena, I could do it. I could prove the existence of UFOs in contact with human beings in any courtroom in the world because of the overwhelming amount of eyewitness testimony by credible people. We mentioned before 4,000 plus physical trace cases. Now that people have camcorders, we're getting more and more film footage. The dam is breaking. What has been a curtain of silence is being torn down. People are no longer subjects of ridicule just because they've had a UFO encounter.
Exactly. So, and there are people like myself of high strangeness. In fact, you're the one that defined that for me in my writings. We're almost at the end of this segment here. And so I want to thank you for being my guest.
It's been a pleasure.
I would like to tell the friends out there that what we plan on doing is, if you write me a postcard, my address will be shown at the end of the show. If you give me your name, I will pick a name, and ask you to come and see me when we do one of these shows, and I will do a mini reading for you, because I'm also one of the local intuitives, you know. And we will talk about books sometimes. We will talk about movies and just fun things. And we live in really complicated times now where everybody is very stressed out. And so what I like to stress to you is to be good to yourself, and whatever you do, keep your sense of humor. And again, thank you very much for visiting with me. Until the next time. And thank you, James. It was so nice for you to come. And thank you very much.
You're very, very welcome.
Yes. Good night.